I think it's important to point out, because there is a lot of press here, that MAHA is a movement of the people, a diversified group of people that don't necessarily agree on every single point that you're going to hear here today. I want to make it clear, just because I did spend a lot of time with Robert Kennedy Jr. as his Director of Communications, that he has no intention of erasing the vaccine program from existence. I think that my nonprofit, for instance, is called Informed Consent Action Network. I want informed consent. If you want to believe in vaccines, if you want some of the vaccines, all the vaccines, you know, that is your right. We live in a free country. And I think the most important thing in a free country is that you have the right to choose. And so there will be people here today that would love to see vaccines erased from existence. And they'll explain all the reasons why. I don't think that's realistic. I also don't think it would be fair to move from a place where we're being forced to inject our children with products, even after we've done our own research and recognized that we have issues with them, to then turn around and say, I'm going to force you to never use a vaccine because of my perspective of the science. I don't think that that is how this country is supposed to work. So I just want to say that what I want to talk about is the reasonable perspective on this that is the way I see it. And ultimately, I can't imagine that we can call ourselves free if we live in a country where anyone, any bureaucrat, any neighbor, anyone outside of my family is making my medical choices for me. That's right. All right? I'm going to start this out with the same way Robert Kennedy Jr. started out our meeting at NIH during Trump's first presidential term. We had a meeting set up. Tony Fauci was sitting right across from me. Francis Collins was sitting right across from Robert Kennedy Jr. And we pointed out this study. This was a study out of Guinea-Bissau, Africa, by Peter Abe, a guy who is pro-vaccine, has been a part of designing vaccine programs for the third world. And he decided 30 years after a program in Guinea-Bissau, Africa, to go back. And he recognized, I have a perfectly natural, randomized control trial, because we went and vaccinated with DTP and polio vaccines, but specifically in this case, the DTP vaccine, and could only get to about half the kids. So half the kids got it, half the kids didn't. 30 years later, he could go and look at what were the overall health outcomes, what was the long-term health outcome, and he discovered that children were dying at 5 times the rate of if they got the DTP vaccine versus those that did not. This is a huge discovery. This is, I just want to let him explain, and I want you to listen carefully to everything he's saying. Remember, still pro-vaccine. He thinks there's vaccines that are bad, some that are good. But this is the point that he had to make after doing a study that had never been done for 30 years.
This is about vaccines. And I think it's important to recognize that no routine vaccine was tested for overall effect on mortality in randomized trials before being introduced. I guess most of you think that we know what our vaccines are doing. We don't. The program we are talking about at the time, the vaccine program, was introduced sort of in the late 70s after the success with the eradication of smallpox. WHO made sort of the first immunization program for the low-income countries. What comes out here, you have 2.3 times higher mortality if you are DTP vaccinated. And that is the most commonly used vaccine in the world. And note again that this is clearly worse for girls than for boys. It's not good for boys, but the girls do worse. When you introduce DTP, the booster, mortality goes up. When we introduce hepatitis B, which is also an inactivated vaccine, the same thing happened. So by now we have shown negative effect for girls for 6 inactivated vaccines. DTP1 is 20% higher mortality, but then when you come to DTP3, it's 70% higher mortality for the girls, for the boys. So the whooping cough vaccine or pertussis vaccine was associated with 2-fold higher mortality. And please note that the tendency is that this seems to be slightly worse for girls. You can have a vaccine which is fully protective against a specific disease, but associated with higher mortality. How is that possible?
This is how we started this conversation at the NIH, and I think ultimately years later it's why Robert Kennedy Jr. is HHS secretary. These are the questions that mainstream science has been running into and does not have answers to. Ultimately, what did he say? You may think we know what vaccines are doing, but we do not. We have never tested for all-cause mortality. This is critical to this conversation. And this is the argument that I will say that as we stand here today, this is what we've won against the mainstream press. I used to be one of them. They would always say, when we say there's never been a double-blind placebo-based trial, they would write, the experts say that that is not true, that that is misinformation. I just had an Atlantic article, if I get to it, I'll talk about it later, but that's no longer the statement. In fact, they're being told to change that statement. Now the statement is, okay, we didn't have placebo-based trials of the vaccines that are currently on the schedule, but they're tested against the original vaccines that were tested against placebos. That's not true either. My nonprofit, Informed Consent Action Network, with Aaron Siri, our attorney, has been suing the government since 2017, winning against FDA, CDC, NIH, Health and Human Services. Some of these cases we've teamed up with Children's Health Defense and Robert Kennedy Jr. But what we proved unequivocally, and this is the list, including even those that were tested against, not a single childhood vaccine on the schedule has ever been through a double-blind placebo-based trial prior to licensure, and neither have any of the vaccines they were tested against. Full stop. And I've said to every journalist, reporter, if you can find a study with a saline placebo, not some, antibiotic-filled carrier fluid, but actual, no effect on the human body, then show it to us. They can't publish it, they can't print it because it does not exist. This is gigantic. It's bigger than mainstream press is even realizing. What this means is, as of this moment, in the world, mainstream press, mainstream medicine no longer can stand on any ethical or moral high ground. They've been trying to be condescending towards anyone that asks questions about vaccines, stating our experts say they've done the safety trials. It is now a known fact they were never done. No placebo trial anywhere in sight, and Peter Abe is just one of hundreds of doctors now worldwide, some in this room, that are admitting exactly that, either from their own studies or their own research. And so what that means is mainstream medicine is on the exact same level playing field as anti-vaxxers, vaccine hesitancy, whatever you want to call us, the medical freedom movement. We are all now stuck with, post introduction to the vaccines, we're all stuck with retrospective studies. Your retrospective studies against my retrospective studies. But you have no science as groundwork to establish safety. This is a major problem, especially when every single retrospective vaxxed versus unvaccinated study that's being done shows the vaccinated are far sicker. Now what do? This is alarming for all of us. None of us want to be in this position. No one's happy to have to report that we've had a system injecting our kids that is systematically poisoning them. Even though we knew it was based on a great idea, the problem was, and let me make it clear, all of the scientists involved with the vaccine program only set out to prove one thing, that their product creates antibodies. That was it. That's the entire study. See, we created antibodies. Never a question, well, even if you don't have a rash from measles, are you really avoiding any neurological damage from inflammation? Don't know, never asked, never studied. The assumption was if you make antibodies without that rash or without the full symptoms, then that must mean it's safer. But that's an assumption, that's not science. Science has to ask the appropriate questions. Did we reduce the harms that the diseases, yes, had themselves? We do not know. What we do know is this, that coterminously in 1986, when we had 11 vaccines, our chronic disease rate in America was 12.8%. Then we had the 1986 Act, took away liability, and suddenly the vaccine program became a gold rush, 54 shots, 72 vaccines. Thank God for Robert Kennedy Jr. for cutting this almost in half so that, a year from now, this slide won't make any sense. But at that same exact time, we went from 12.8% chronic disease to over 54% chronic disease if you include, weight issues, obesity, or 40% if you take obesity out. So now our kids are literally in a coin toss, a 50-50 chance of being chronically ill. This isn't happening with any other mammal on the planet. Only the smartest mammal. Why? Okay. Harvard Medical School, and I went through, these are all old slides. I decided today we're going to go through some old slides. Harvard Medical School decided to test the VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And they said, let's run our entire HMO through it. And what they discovered was that it was not capturing nearly the amount of injuries that it was supposed to. Here they show that of 715,000 patients and 35,000 doses, 35,000 possible reactions out of 1.4 million doses, or 2.6% adverse reactions. When they discovered this, they also said it appears VAERS is capturing less than 1% of the total amount of actual vaccine injuries. Less than 1%. Now, every time you quote VAERS, the media is supposed to tell you, and they do loudly, well, VAERS isn't a verified system. It can be reported by anybody. Yes, that's true. But usually it's only reported by doctors because they're the only ones who will put in the time. It's very time intensive. But more specifically, every study that has ever been done on the VAERS system shows that it's underreporting. Never, ever has anyone looked at the system saying it's overreporting. So it's at least as many injuries as we're seeing. So any study we're doing on it is the minimum amount possible. This is 2018, before we had COVID. 533 deaths on VAERS, 1,438 permanent disabilities, 5,000 hospitalizations, 5,588 emergency room visits. Well, this is what Harvard Medical School discovered. That's less than 1%. And then former Commissioner David Kessler, he said it's a fraction when they looked into it. So let's just follow this down, because we have no placebo-based trials. Mainstream science has left us totally abandoned of real science. So we're left with a retrospective look at what we're doing. VAERS is that retrospective look. Harvard Medical School says it's less than 1%. So if we're going to try and determine how many injuries are happening, which is what we're doing today, if it's 1%, this is what VAERS was representing for 2018. A potential of 6 million reports, 53,000 deaths, 143,000 permanent disabilities, 510,000 hospitalizations, and 500,000 emergency room visits. Now, is this any way to do science? Absolutely not. But why is this all we're left with? And who's going to scream and yell that you're doing it wrong when this is the only choices that we have? We've seen the unvaccinated, vaccinated studies. This is the Mawson study. And Brian Hooker's studies and Paul Thomas's are all coming out roughly the same. You saw just moments ago stats that look just like this. 4 times the rate of ADHD, 4 times the rate of neurological, or 5 times the rate of neurological disorders. And that's exactly what Henry Ford discovered. So for anyone that hasn't seen this film, and why I think this is the most important study in the world, is so far every study that's been done has been done by either Brian Hooker or Mawson or Paul Thomas. And as soon as you do that study, you're immediately labeled, if you weren't already, you're an anti-vaxxer. You have a bias. You have a bias towards the science. Now, I would argue this. If we're saying that bias has any effect on science whatsoever, then you have just pointed out my exact problem with all the science done around vaccines. I can't find a scientific study that wasn't funded by people that didn't absolutely believe that vaccines are the greatest invention of the 20th century. So what kind of challenge study are you doing? You're doing studies with an endpoint to prove that they're great, that they're safe. What would happen if you couldn't prove that? So maybe Brian has a bias because his son's injured, but he's doing good science. but now we have his bias science against your bias science. Where are we at? We're at the same place. We're an equal playing field. No one gets a high ground here. We are abandoned by science, and our kids are the representation of where we're at, the sickest nation in the world, the sickest generation this nation has ever seen. No one gets to have pride under these circumstances. Here's just the trailer really quick.
We are now the sickest country in the world.
It is now believed that over 54% of our kids have a permanent chronic disease. Shouldn't we look closest at the one product designed to alter our immune system for life? There'd be one easy study to rule it out, the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study.
As fate would have it, Dell met Marcus Servos.
He agreed to do a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study.
Kids that are vaccinated, it doesn't look so good.
4.47 times the amount.
5.5 times risk.
6 times increase.
Amongst the unvaccinated group, there were 0.
Like, if this is true, this is devastating.
And it needs to be published.
This is information the public should have had in 2020, and I forced the issue.
Did you see how Ford responded?
They said this report was not published because it did not meet the rigorous scientific standards we demand as a premier medical research institution.
They have forced our hand. We're gonna have to show them the footage.
I'm gonna bring hidden cameras and recording equipment so that no matter what happens at this dinner, I can prove it happened.
You're doing well. Good to see you.
What do you think about the study you guys have done?
Well, I think it's a good study, but it does have limitations.
Do you find any flaws in the study? I mean, is there a way they could do the study better?
Not that I put it out just how it is. I don't want to say it's not the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, but I just don't want to. Somebody's going to come back and they're going to say, the study is flawed.
The unpublished Henry Ford analysis is fundamentally flawed.
How about looking at this as important scientific information that can inform how the proper study should be done? Won't be taken like that. And then I can say, because there's a political agenda to it.
Is what your study shows, is it important?
Yeah, it is important. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
If I can't get the study out, then what hope is there for every kid in the future? I said to you, if you do this study, you're going to come under fire. You said, I don't care about that. I'm all about the data, and I'm about to retire anyway. That's literally what you said.
Yeah.
So your energy has definitely changed on that. But
energy's changing. Publishing something like that, might as well retire. I'd be finished.
This is an inconvenient study for the entire vaccine agenda.
I did something that some people in this room said we should never have done. I kept saying we got to get the CDC or someone to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. And there were people that would say, Del, you keep asking for that. They're going to manipulate that study. I will tell you, when I left the NIH meeting with Robert Kennedy Jr., and they showed the fear that they did of ever doing a comparative study, said they would never do it, it became clear to me they must have done this study 1,000 times. And they cannot get the result they're looking for. Think about it. I'm not standing here today. There's no one in this room. Robert Kennedy Jr. is not HHS secretary. If any major medical organization or any regulatory agency in the world could simply compare vaccinated kids to unvaccinated kids and show that the vaccinated are clearly healthier. That should be, by the way, the easiest study known to man. If these products that were designed to make our kids healthier, make them healthier, how hard is that study to do? Yet 10 have been done, all with the same results, but this time, if you'll hear in the movie from a man that says, I am pro-vaccine, I am not putting this out, I don't want to end the vaccine program. Is there anything wrong with the study? Nothing wrong with the study. Would you publish it just as it is if the climate was different? Definitely. Would you publish it if the mainstream press wouldn't ridicule you or just avoid the story altogether, which they've obviously done? But what happened here? The press will say, well, they didn't publish it. It's not my deal. It's not that an anti-vaxxer did this study and couldn't get a journal to publish it. Henry Ford didn't come out and say, that we had a janitor do this study and it wasn't, properly done. It was their top scientist. It was their data. They said there's problems with the data. It's your data. It's the most complete data set, really one of the most in the entire country. Why was it He couldn't get a study that showed us anything different than the Boston study. In the end, 2.5 times the rate of chronic disease amongst the vaccinated, 6 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders, 6 times the rate of autoimmune disease. These kids were so incredibly sick. Tens of thousands studied. This is where we're at. This is where all of media should be. It started out, there was 2 journalists, Jeffrey Tucker and I, and a bunch of people that have been talking about it for a long time, saying, hello, Houston, it looks like there's a problem here. Now, every podcaster in the world is covering this, and the mainstream is clinging on to this rock as the waves are smashing at them left and right. This is the most recent Atlantic article about me. I genuinely am upset that your kids are vaccinated. Del Bigtree, a longtime ally of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., isn't just anti-vaccine, he's pro-infection. Can't beat headlines like that. And guess what? I said that. I'm going to go through some numbers that we can prove. This is the vital statistics, the CDC of the time in 1960. There you have it, measles. Death rate 0.2 per 100,000. Death rate was 1 in 500,000. That means about 400 or 500 people per year. Now, I suppose the press will try to make us really care about the 400, and we should. Those are real people, but why do they matter and not the people that we know are dying from vaccines and are being injured by vaccines? There is a warning label, by the way, wrapped around every vaccine like every drug. People die every year from vaccines. Fact. People are injured and made sick and develop autoimmune disease every year. Fact. Why doesn't the media care about those people? Why don't they want to know what the number actually is? Is it because it hurts our orthodoxy? Do we want to believe in an immaculate product that is conceived brilliantly by angels at Merck and Pfizer and Sanofi Aventis? I suppose. But 400 people died per year. So we are vaccinating our kids, not 1 time, not 2 times, 3 times with a vaccine that clearly didn't work with the first shot, to protect 400 kids per year. But there are tons of studies on risks of cancer, risks of heart disease. The lists go on and on. Reduction of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma if you've had measles and mumps, 40% reduction. Reduction of Hodgkin's lymphoma, 70% reduction. So that right there, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, 19,000. So 40% would not die from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma if they'd had measles as a kid. So what did we just save right there? At least 5,000 to 7,000 people every year saved by not giving a measles vaccine. That already destroyed your 400. You're 400 out of the water. We're underwater now. Hodgkin's lymphoma, 1,000. 70% reduction there, what? 700 more. Ovarian cancer cut in half. 50% if the woman had measles and mumps as a child. These are huge numbers, saving thousands and thousands. 7,000 more saved right there. Look at this. Arteriosclerosis, this is the big one. This is the #1 cause of death in the world. 20% reduction in death from myocarditis and total CVD. Same for women, about 17%. So 20% reduction in death from heart disease in America, the #1 killer, about 1 million every single year if you go ahead and Google it. So that's 200,000 people saved if they were allowed to have mumps and measles as a child. Those are my kids. I'm not here to talk about the vaccine injury of my children because I've never vaccinated them. I will never vaccinate them. They will have that choice once they're 18. They can go on and make their own decisions if they still live in a free country. But these are the reasons I'm not vaccinating my kids. I believe they're healthier. Yes, I am pro-infections that kill 400 kids that were probably very, very sick, and I'm sure we should work on treatments for them. But think about the biggest scam of all times. Think about COVID, where we now know the death rate's about 0.35%, a bad flu season. Look what pharma did. They could have made a product, like call it a drug. It's really the only difference. Call it a drug, and you sell it to 0.35% of the population that could die from this disease? Or do you make a product that the 99.7% have to take in order to protect the 0.35%? Hey, there's a genius idea. Let's make a product that everybody else has to take to protect that tiny percent. That 400 dying from measles, that 400 getting hepatitis B, when millions and millions are being injured, as I think we see here today. And lastly, I want to finish up. Robert Kennedy Jr. is not your enemy. Robert Kennedy Jr. is in there trying to ask the right questions. And if he has a bias, he's reaching out to every scientist that's out there. Do the vax versus unvax studies. Prove us wrong. Get it done. This is Bernadine Healy at the NIH long before Robert Kennedy Jr. was there. What did she say we should be doing? What did she say about the science around autism? This is 2008.
This is the time when we do have the opportunity to understand whether or not there are susceptible children, perhaps genetically, perhaps they have a metabolic issue, mitochondrial disorder, immunological issue, that makes them more susceptible to vaccines, plural, or to one particular vaccine, or to a component of vaccine, like mercury. The fact that there is concern that you don't want to know that susceptible group is a real disappointment to me. If you know that susceptible group, you can save those children. The reason why they didn't want to look for those susceptibility groups was because they're afraid that if they found them, however big or small they were, that would scare the public away.
It sounds like you don't think the hypothesis of a link between vaccines and autism is completely irrational.
So when I first heard about it, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me. The more you delve into it, if you look at the basic science, if you look at the research that's been done in animals, if you also look at some of these individual cases, and if you look at the evidence that there is no link, what I come away with is the question has not been answered.
This is a time where we should be doing the science. She was shocked to find that there was no science that ever actually looked at those who got autism after a vaccine. Isn't that a mind-blowing statement by the head of NIH? We've never looked at the children that actually got autism, that their parents said, I saw it happen right after a vaccine. Great, let's get your kids right into a study. When we hear about the mountains of studies, another simple study they've never done. Just like the vaccinated versus unvaccinated, they've never done a study looking at children whose parents said, I watched them regress right after their vaccine. I also want to point out that Hannah Poling was paid in vaccine court for autism. Millions of dollars, so somebody got autism from a vaccine. We like to forget about that. And in this Atlantic article, he asked me, how are you so, okay putting your kids at risk of polio and measles and all these febrile diseases? He's like, I've heard your argument. I know you think it makes them healthier, but aren't you worried about that risk at all? And I walked off. I actually walked to my car, and it hit me. And I walked back inside and said something I haven't said in a long time. I said, you know what I am afraid of? I am afraid of autism. As a parent, an issue that is 1 in 30, not 1 in 10,000 like measles, not even 1 in 1,000, 1 in 30, 1 in 12.5 boys in California right now. Sure, the Atlantic will want to point out that they're not all, extreme autism, that some of them are going to college, that's true. But if I've interviewed the parents whose kids are still in diapers at 18, that will never, ever get married, that won't really be able to have the life that was given to them by God, that this nation is supposed to protect their inalienable right. I'm afraid of that for my kids. I'm afraid for every kid, and I can tell you, because of the studies that I have looked at, because of the interviews I have done, vaccines are causing autism. Vaccines are causing autoimmune disease. Vaccines are causing neurodevelopmental disorders. Vaccines are causing speech delays. All of these things, separated by the way, are listed in the vaccine insert. They know. causes speech delays, causes tics, causes seizures, causes encephalitis, brain swelling. Put all together like Nick Kolscher's done, those are all attributes of autism. We'll pay them separately, but there's no way all of them put together could have happened from a vaccine. We're in a reckoning moment right now. We've got to stay calm. We got to keep talking to these people in the newspapers. They're human beings. They were brainwashed just like many of you who are here because your child was injured by a vaccine. And prior to that experience, you would have maybe been yelling at another parent for not doing the same thing. The culture is falling apart. The religion is dissolving right before our eyes. Be gracious. We're winning. But be loud and more proud than you've ever been. Thank you.